terrifying things happen in times of war, and that fear usually comes from having to face the enemy. But what happens if something paranormal creeps into the war zone? Instead of the enemy, you are faced with ghosts, apparitions, and entities. This is not what you signed up for, and certainly not trained for. Because of the brutal nature of wars, they have attracted stories about supernatural phenomena since time immemorial. Of the more recent wars, Afghanistan has attracted its share of paranormal terror on its desolate battlefields. Because of its geographic location, Afghanistan has a long history of war, from the British in the late 19th century, the Soviets in the 1980s, and the present war since 2001. This is a place that is not only plagued by fighting and violence, but there are stories told of strange happenings where the enemy is not always the only thing to be scared of in this bleak and desolate landscape. The following are 3 haunting tales from the war in Afghanistan. Number 3. The Phantom Figure. A soldier reported a mysterious phantom that would appear around the outskirts of their camp and suddenly vanish. It first appeared a little after dusk, a couple hundred yards from their position. One of the men told the others that there was a person out in the wilderness just standing there, and in the darkness he could just make out a dark shape. The sergeant was called over and he saw it too, and when he asked where the figure had come from, the private explained that it had suddenly appeared. Whoever or whatever was out there was just standing motionless with his back to them. It was very eerie. They watched this figure for about 3 hours just standing there motionless with his back to them. They could make out that it was an adult male, average height and build, but when they observed it through a thermal monocular, they were shocked to see that it registered no heat signature, and then it just disappeared in front of their eyes. About 6 months later, the same soldier was out on patrol when 2 of his unit reported seeing 2 figures standing a couple of hundred yards away. They stopped the vehicle to check them out, where they appeared to be just 2 men standing with their backs to them. They were motionless and would not respond when spoken to, just as previously happened 6 months earlier. The lieutenant called it in, and some of the men got out to further investigate. The lieutenant and his men came back with weird looks on their faces and said, "We're out of here." They later claimed that as they got to within 50 yards of the figures, they suddenly disappeared in front of them. Number 2. The Smoking Entity. Jerry Aberdeen was stationed in Mosul, Nanawa province, Afghanistan in 2004, when a call went out on the radio that the airfield was under attack. All available infantrymen jumped into the closest vehicle and headed to the airfield to counter the attack. Jerry Aberdeen was in the vehicle with some other infantry guys, and when they got to the airfield, they saw some men trying to climb over the wall. The gunner opened up on them, and the rest of the soldiers took up a position in a ditch on the other side of the road and opened fire. There were 3 soldiers alongside Aberdeen, where they suddenly fired and one of the enemy dropped from the top of the wall. Right after he fell, there was a stream of black smoke coming out of him. The engineer made a comment that he must have been wearing a suicide vest and it malfunctioned. A few seconds later, the black smoke grew larger and started to take on a human-looking form. What happened next was witnessed by all 3 men, leaving them totally aghast. The now fully materialized black smoke was standing upright and had red glowing eyes and a weird-shaped mouth. The weird figure actually smiled at them and turned to run, but suddenly dissolved into nothing after taking a few steps. All 3 men just looked at each other, wide-eyed, for a second or two. The men said that they only discussed the bizarre incident once after the event and have never spoken about it since. Number 1. The Haunted Outpost. There is an exposed outpost called Observation Point Rock, which is situated near the ruins of an ancient mud fort It was captured from the Taliban in 2008 and holds a small contingent of US Marines. It also has a sinister reputation for being haunted. As soon as the Marines moved in, they heard about how Taliban fighters had been buried alive in the caves below. Whilst digging a trench, Marines were coming across Russian remains where a contingent of Russian soldiers had been executed there in the mid-1980s after being found by the Mujahideen. Not surprising, but with all the history of violence and dead bodies that were buried there, weird reports would start coming out amongst the troops stationed there. Noises with no discernible source, objects moving on their own, strange lights, disembodied cries or screams, the sound of footsteps or crunching gravel. When there was no one there, the sudden onset of heavy feelings of dread. The men serving there were often plagued with various strange phenomena. Electrical equipment would often malfunction, and newly installed batteries would go dead within minutes. Machine gun fire or incoming rockets could be heard, but nothing appeared to land or explode. The local people claimed that the place is haunted. The soldiers would witness strange lights in the sky at night. Strange phenomena were said to have been going on before they even arrived. The British soldiers who had occupied the base before them also supposedly experienced strange events and warned the American troops of what to expect when they got there. They claimed that shadows moved about in the desert, which was recorded by infrared cameras before vanishing. Dancing lights could be observed through night vision goggles. There were often voices coming from nowhere and screams coming from the desert at night. Corporal Jacob Lima tells one story concerning Observation Point Rock, where he claimed that one night he was startled by a chilling scream coming from one of the men, and when he ran to investigate, he found the Corporal Zolik cowering in fear at his guard post. Zolik claimed that as he was sitting there, he had felt breath on his ear and heard a clear voice whisper something in Russian. The man was so terrified that he begged Lim to stay with him until his shift was finished. As they waited there together, they would hear footsteps coming from the observation post above them, even though no one else was there. One night, Lima was scanning the area with thermal imaging and saw what looked like another soldier standing out in the desert. As he investigated further, the figure vanished into thin air right before his eyes. Other men frequently reported hearing disembodied whispers in Russian around the outpost. On another occasion, Lima was on watch and suddenly heard a dog that was kept there, named Ugly Betty, barking wildly at something. Thinking it could be the enemy, Lima put on his night vision goggles and saw what appeared to be a figure in the distance. He then switched to thermal imaging, but the figure was gone. When he went back to night vision, the mysterious figure suddenly reappeared, but had come inextricably closer. A switch back to thermal once again turned up no heat signature at all, but Lima felt that the eerie figure was still there. Suddenly, he lost sight of the figure altogether, at which point he felt a heavy tap on his shoulder. When he turned around, there was no one there. However, the dog continued to bark. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit like. It really helps to keep the channel growing. And if you're new here, subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest videos. We've got lots of strange and fascinating stories coming up, and we'd love to have you along for the journey. Some of the most haunted places in the world have experienced violent battles, whether it is now or from centuries ago. Battlefields are full of such eerie stories as they collect ghosts of the fallen. These places were saturated with killing and anguish, leaving an emotional blueprint and creating restless spirits. All of this negative energy somehow manifests itself and creates haunted environments where the horrors of war have now etched themselves into the landscape and continue to play back like a video. The people who visit these environments can sometimes come face to face with this haunting and can relive the terror. The following are 5 more stories from war-ravaged Afghanistan, with unexplained events that managed to terrorize the bravest of soldiers. Number 5. The Phantom Lieutenant. A returned soldier claims to have witnessed encounters with ghosts during his service, and one of them occurred as he was sitting with 4 fellow servicemen in a makeshift office with 3 rooms. He said he was standing near the back door and noticed his lieutenant step through the door. He could see the man clearly with a moustache and wearing a flame-retarded suit, and thought nothing of it as the officer walked into the next room. 30 seconds later, a call came through asking for the lieutenant, and the witness went into the other room to inform him. Strangely, the room was completely empty. Nobody was there. Since there was no other door out of the office, the witness asked if anyone had noticed the lieutenant leave, but nobody had. There were 4 other men in the room, yet nobody noticed the lieutenant. He just disappeared. The witness looked outside, but could find no sign of him. The lieutenant had just disappeared into thin air. Someone had walked in, and nobody came out. Number 4. The Rocks. A Marine who had served in Afghanistan and Yemen from 2009 to 2013 relates an odd experience. One evening at 1 a.m, he had just finished setting up a patrol base with 4 members of his squad, while the other 17 men slept. In front of the patrol base was a huge open field, and to the left was, rather spookily, an Afghan cemetery. As the witness was looking out over the field on watch duty, he claims that a rock came hurtling through the air to land at his feet. Thinking this to be peculiar, he peered out into the darkness over the field, which was wide open with no blind spots or hiding places, but he couldn't see anyone there nor any movement. As he was looking, another rock reportedly was tossed in his direction from the field. The witness put on night vision equipment but could still see no one there, and infrared turned up no heat signatures either. The night was completely quiet, and that field was totally empty. Yet another rock would be lobbed at him as he tried to figure out what was going on, and the whole thing was quite unnerving. As the Marine could see 360 degrees around him, he would have been able to see who was throwing the rocks. They appeared to come out of nowhere. One famous haunted location in Afghanistan was Forward Operating Base Salerno, where unexplained phenomena had become almost legendary in the region among military personnel. The following story is of the ghostly spectre of a little girl, seen and felt on many occasions as the men stood guard on 2 high watchtowers. It is hard to doubt the soldier's credibility when the apparition was seen and experienced by several men all at once or on separate occasions. The following are 3 stories told by men who encountered this ghost girl, leaving some of them in a state of hysteria. Number 3. Haunted Watchtower, the Screaming Ghost Girl. Forward Operating Base Salerno sits on an old Afghan graveyard as overlooked by 2 high watchtowers. The towers are said to be haunted by what appears to be the spirit of a little girl, who is heard or seen wandering around either in the towers themselves or in the area around them. One night, 2 parachuters with the 2nd Battalion of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, named Painter and Jackson, were startled by a blood-curdling, shrill laugh emanating from their radio. The laugh was described as sounding like that of a little girl, and Painter claimed that no grown man in the army could have made that scream. When the creepy laugh stopped, the 2 men radioed to each other on watch for their opinions, but no one else had heard a thing. The following evening, the 2 men were on watch duty again in the same place, still rattled by what had happened the night before. As they sat there in the dark, they heard movement and footsteps in the tower around the trapdoor that led to another level, even though they were the only ones there. The room then suddenly became very cold for no apparent reason. As if this wasn't unsettling enough, a call came over the radio from the other watchtower, claiming that they were detecting a small 3-foot figure wandering around in the dark outside. The figure seemed to be waving at them. Then Jackson went out onto the balcony to investigate but saw nothing but the desolate landscape and graveyard out in the darkness. Thermal imaging equipment also turned up no heat signatures of any kind. The frightened men continued the rest of their shift with no further dramas. Although the men were unnerved by the ordeal, they both agreed that the entity was probably not malevolent. Number 2, Haunted Watchtower, the ghost girl with a goat. 2 Marines were in one of the army-based watchtowers overlooking the Afghan graveyard, and when they looked out and clearly saw through the night vision goggles a young girl walking along in the desert night with a goat. But when they took the goggles off, both the girl and the goat were gone. As soon as they put the goggles back on, the girl was back. This time she was standing on the watchtower balcony, much to the horror of the guards. In an incredible short period of time, she had somehow covered a large distance and was almost on top of them. The event was so shocking that the Marines were hysterical and refused to go back to the tower. However, this was not an isolated incident, as there had been other sightings of the ghostly little girl out walking about, either by herself or with a goat, both always undetectable by thermal imaging or night vision. Number 1. The Invisible Entity. Another account at the base was of an airman who had done 2 deployments in Afghanistan and had spent much of that time stationed at the base, where he stayed at a compound designated for aviation personnel. One night, he was out with another person from his platoon, visiting a friend of theirs who was doing guard duty at one of the towers. The friends spent some time chatting, and by the time they left the guard, it was quite late, and as there was no moon that night, it was pitch black. This made it extremely difficult returning to their compound, as they had no night vision goggles to guide them, and got lost and headed back to the guard tower to ask for directions. As they were returning to the compound, they heard some rustling and footsteps, and it felt as if someone was coming up behind them, but when they looked, there was nobody there. This eerie feeling happened a few more times, and every time they turned around, there was nothing, and were relieved when they finally reached their destination. Were they just spooked, or could this have been the same ghostly child playing games and following them?